Think your life is tough? Wait till you experience medieval times. You wouldn't survive a single day. In today's world, we have comforts, plumbing, electricity, indoor heating, but in the 12th century, even waking up in the morning could mean facing the harshest realities imaginable. The challenges people faced in the medieval era were so brutal that it would break you within 24 hours. There were no modern luxuries, no medicine, no cleanliness, and no rights to speak of. And that meal you're having right now, in medieval times, that could have been the worst part of your day. Let's break it down. Medieval food. Imagine a day where you wake up and can't even find clean water to drink. Bread becomes your lifeline, but it's more rock than fluff. Want to see just how bad it could get? Stick with me, because medieval life will shock you at every turn. Forget those grand feasts you see in movies, giant turkey legs, wine fountains. That's for the elite. For the average person, bland, unsafe, and repetitive meals were the daily norm. Pottage, a watery mix of vegetables, grains, and whatever else was growing in the field, was the staple of almost everyone's diet. It was the medieval version of mystery soup, except the mystery wasn't hidden vegetables. It was dirt and weevils. Then there's bread. Medieval bread wasn't anything close to the fluffy, soft loaves you're used to today. It was dense, dark, and often full of contaminants, stone chips, bits of dirt, and sometimes even fungus. You'd be chewing on it for hours, but the texture was closer to chewing on rocks than bread. That's right, medieval peasants had strong teeth, but not because of genetics, because they spent their entire lives chewing grain-filled rock dough. But wait, it gets worse, much worse. That bread you're munching on? It could contain ergot, a deadly fungus that grows on rye. Ergot poisoning would make you hallucinate, cause burning sensations, and sometimes death. Imagine thinking you're about to face a witch trial, only to discover your baker's bread is the real culprit. And that's just the start of what medieval people had to eat. Meat? That was a luxury for the rich. For the rest, you'd be lucky to get your hands on a chunk of rotten, salted fish. Now, let's talk about water, the one thing you'd need to survive. Unfortunately, drinking water would make you sick. Water sources in the medieval world were often contaminated with human waste and other nasty bacteria. You know what you drank instead? Beer. That's right. Beer was safer than water. It wasn't the strong beer you're familiar with today, but a weak, watered-down version that was safer to consume because the brewing process killed the germs. Imagine being a child, drinking ale at every meal. By the time they hit 5, kids would be drinking 8 pints a day, not to get drunk, but to survive. For the common folk, water was more of a luxury than beer. You're probably feeling a little queasy by now, but brace yourself. The medieval bathroom was an experience you couldn't imagine. Most people didn't have the luxury of modern toilets. Instead, they used a chamber pot, a bucket or bowl kept under the bed. Once full, you either dumped it yourself or waited for someone else to do it. And where did you think it went? Right out the window into the street below. Medieval waste management was no joke. Townspeople would shout, "Guardy L," which meant, "Watch out for the waste," before tossing human waste into the streets. If you lived in a castle, you might encounter the garderobe, a hole in a stone seat that dropped waste straight down the castle walls. Royalty and nobility didn't have fancy toilets. They just had drafty holes. But if you lived in a city, public privies were the go-to. But you wouldn't get much privacy there, just a public stall over a river, and you'd be doing your business while others were walking by. The gong farmers were the unlucky workers tasked with hauling waste out of the city, working at night, because nobody wanted to see or smell them. Forget what you know about medieval knights and ladies. Most people were farmers, working back-breaking jobs from sunrise to sunset. Their lives were defined by labor and survival. Imagine waking up at the crack of dawn to plow fields using wooden tools pulled by oxen, then planting crops by hand, and finally harvesting with simple sickles. During harvest, peasants worked 16-hour days. They burned 4,000 calories a day just by working, no gyms needed. A typical day for a medieval farmer was nothing like today's modern workday. It was about farming to survive, not to thrive. If farming wasn't your thing, you could always pick up a trade, but the competition was just as tough. Blacksmiths worked in smoke-filled forges, breathing in toxic fumes and risking burns. Tanners dealt with urine and toxic chemicals that turned their skin yellow and stunk to high heaven. If you somehow survived the brutal labor, You'd have to deal with the diseases and lack of healthcare. Medieval medicine was mostly trial and error. Imagine going to the doctor for a cold and the solution is bloodletting. Why? Because medieval people thought blood was the cause of illness. Too much? Let's drain some. Leeches were also used to draw out the bad blood. You might find yourself with 70 leeches on your body if you were unlucky enough to see a medieval doctor. The plague, smallpox, and malaria wiped out entire villages. The bubonic plague alone killed half of Europe's population. The average life expectancy was around 30 to 40 years. Dental problems were a nightmare, too. No toothbrush, no dental hygiene. Tooth decay was rampant. And medieval dentists? They didn't need appointments. They waited for someone to scream loud enough to be heard across the town. The legal system in medieval times was unforgiving, and the punishment didn't always fit the crime. Minor offenses could lead to public execution. If you stole food because you were starving, you could find yourself losing a hand. And don't even think about a trial by jury. In the medieval world, the concept of innocent until proven guilty didn't exist. Instead, there were trials by ordeal, like carrying a red-hot iron bar for 9 feet. If you survived, you were innocent. If your burns became infected, you were guilty. And for the worst criminals, like traitors, the punishment was horrific. Drawing and quartering was a public spectacle where the condemned was disemboweled, beheaded, and then quartered. Medieval executions weren't just public. They were a festival. And the worst part? Nobles didn't face the same system. They could hire professional fighters to represent them, or simply pay their way out of punishment. Let's talk about war. Medieval combat wasn't glorious. It was chaotic, brutal, and lethal. Battles often ended with thousands of dead, most of them from disease, not fighting. The bubonic plague decimated European armies before they even reached battle. Medieval soldiers weren't in shiny armor. Plate armor was a luxury. Most soldiers wore padded cloth with a few metal plates. And even if you had armor, you'd be fighting with axes or agricultural tools, not the sophisticated weapons we see today. The longbow was the most feared weapon, able to pierce armor and trained from childhood. Medieval battles were ferocious, but the real horror was in the aftermath. Armies would ransack villages, stealing whatever they could find, burning homes, and leaving civilians to starve. Cities in medieval times were disgusting. With no garbage collection, streets were covered with rotting food, human waste, and animal entrails. The smell was unbearable. To cope, people carried herb pouches to try to cover it up. Personal hygiene? Non-existent. People bathed only a few times a year, and lice were a constant issue. Even clothing was uncomfortable, often made of rough linen and heavy wool that never felt clean. Social mobility? Forget it. The medieval world was rigid. You were either born into nobility or peasants, and you stayed there. The idea of moving up was nearly impossible. If you were a peasant, you'd spend your entire life working the land and barely scraping by. Entertainment was limited. The real fun was watching public executions or animal fights. As for privacy, there was none. Most houses were one room with multiple families living together. Surviving medieval life wasn't about thriving. It was about enduring. From toxic food to grueling labor, public humiliation, and constant fear of death, life in the Middle Ages was a never-ending test of survival. So, the next time you complain about your modern life, remember, medieval people didn't just have it tough. They had it terrifying. Comfort, clean water, hygiene, these weren't things they could dream of. If you found this journey through medieval horrors eye-opening, hit like, share, and subscribe to learn more about the most brutal periods of history. Because next time you think your life is hard, just remember, it could always be medieval hard.